You're tuned to the Witching Hours on CKCU 93.1 FM in Ottawa. It's me, your host, Kanaska Carter. One of my guests tonight is actually a good friend of mine, Robert L Brashear, who is a pastor and singer-songwriter that lives in Westpark Presbyterian Church in New York City. So I used to stay there in 2011 after the NYPD raided Liberty Plaza during the Occupy Wall Street movement. While staying there 5 years ago, I had a lucid dream. So it was like a female spirit ghost was standing in the doorway with a nightgown on watching me sleep. And she had a look on her face of being kind of upset, like a blank stare. So I had mentioned before that I could also sense a spirit or a presence in the kitchen area. And so I was speaking to Robert about these things, and he said that some people had also reported similar things. So we're going to see what he has to say. I'd like to welcome Robert Brashear to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's really good to be connected with you up in Canada.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've actually heard your voice and had a conversation. So it's nice to see your face. We don't have a camera here at the station, but I could see you. A little creepy.
All right. Yeah, it is.
So, thank you for taking the time to be on my show. It's been a long time. Perhaps you could tell our listeners a bit more about yourself and what it is that you do.
Okay, so I was at the Westpark Church for 22 years, and I was the minister there. And we always tried to have a very open kind of environment. And people always talked a lot about, in addition to that, especially for the last 4 or 5 years, I picked up my songwriting and performing career again. So I've been doing a lot of that recently.
Nice.
Got my first album out last year, and it's available just like everywhere, like CD Baby and Amazon and YouTube and iTunes, all of that. Anyways,
Nice.
In my years at Westpark, people always talked about that they could feel something special there. And mostly when people spoke about it, they were talking about a very positive spirit that they could feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt that, like, whenever we had performances or whenever anything cool happened there, that all those things kind of went into the walls. Like when you guys were there for all that time, I felt there was an incredible amount of positive energy and life that soaked into the walls.
Yeah.
But over the 22 years, I think there were other things that soaked into the walls as well. And we're also part of the life there. And I'll simply start this out by saying that I've had staff people who worked, first of all, I myself have, while not quite as specific as others, have been aware of feeling sensations and feeling things in various different places, whether it's a difference in temperature or a sense of vibration, or just being very aware of some sort of force happening. And then I've had some very sensitive staff people who've had incredibly specific experiences. One of the people who worked with me went into a very detailed description of running into a man. And she described how he was dressed, she described how he looked, she described his beard. And we later discovered that she had described in minute detail what one of the former pastors of the church looked like.
Wow.
And at least 2 other people described running into the same person. And this really affected me because I was aware of something that has not been very widely publicized, which is that this particular pastor committed suicide on Christmas Eve.
Do you know why? Like, what happened with that?
Well, this was not a widely known story, and about 2 years after I'd gone to work there, I was at a conference, and someone sitting beside me had been the former associate pastor there. And we were talking about the church and various different things, and he said, well, did you know that Pastor McAlpin committed suicide? And I said, oh my God, no. And he said, well, it was Christmas Eve. We were getting ready to start the service, and he didn't show up, and he didn't show up. So at that point, the pastor's house was right next door to the church on the top floor in the penthouse. So he said, so they sent me over to look for him, and I went in and found him hanging. He had hung himself.
Wow.
And so he chose not to tell what had really happened, and somehow they managed to keep that a secret from the congregation. But the pastor had hung himself on Christmas Eve, and exactly as he looks, people have continued to see him. So I feel there must be something very restless about his spirit.
Yeah.
But it's even slightly more complex than that, is that at one point in some hidden away part of the church, we found his official portrait, and the official portrait had a knife slash that went diagonally from one shoulder down to the hip. And this completely freaked out my associate who had previously run into him. So there's obviously pain and anguish that we don't fully understand and that I believe is still unresolved at this point.
That's interesting. So what spirits do you think still reside at your church other than this pastor? Have you seen anything else?
Well, again, I've had described in very, very similar detail the young woman that you've described.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of freaky thing about that is that I had heard this described several times. And again, while going through boxes of old things, we found a sepia-toned photograph that looked almost exactly what you described.
With the dark hair and the white nightgown?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I have absolutely no idea what the story behind that is. Although we found, it's like the church has an official basement, and then it has this hollowed out place under where my office was, and we found down there a chair all by itself, looking like it would be like a younger person's chair. We have no idea why or what the story is, but clearly there's this other person as well. And as you and I were talking earlier, there's a very strange history that seems to sort of, in some respects, repeat itself. The very first pastor of the church, there's a stone monument that's in the entry to the way to the church that talks about a pastor named Reverend David Downer. What a name! The first pastor of the church. And as you read through the story, it says, it's carved in the stone. It says, he terminated his ministry and his life on this particular day at the age of 33 years, as you and I were talking about. So there seems to be sort of, I don't know, I'd want to go all the way to the word curse, but I do know that the pastor after McAlpin did not commit suicide, but died very painfully the year he retired in a very from a deep conflict with other people. So I left there in March of 2017.
Okay.
And I'm now the first person in over 40 years to have survived a year after retirement. So, I feel maybe I've broken the curse.
Okay, thank God. I thought you were still there at the church and all that. So you decided to retire.
Retire from that position. I mean, I'm going all over the world doing cool stuff now. And,
that's awesome. So, has there ever been poltergeist activity reported there?
How are you defining that?
So, like anything moving on its own without any person there moving it, or seeing things like either you can either hear voices along with the things moving. Like sometimes you'll see chairs move or cupboard doors open.
Yeah,
like that.
Okay. I just wanted to have you define that. Probably, without being able to go into deep details, at least one of each of those kind of things that you've talked about. Voices especially. Sometimes even choruses. I've heard different people report. And I could almost say that I've heard some of them myself. And whether that's actual poltergeist, or as I as I was saying to you, my sense that the walls soak up things and things stay there.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, yes. And in terms of movement, more than once something is wound up someplace where it wasn't supposed to be. So
Okay.
I think there's no question of the fact that there is spiritual activity of some kind taking place there.
So outside of the church, have you ever had anything strange happen to you, like in houses that you've lived at, or just walking around doing stuff?
I'm going to say, I think I'll say, I think I'm going to answer that no. I think I'll rest with that answer.
Okay. So what do you think happens to our consciousness after we die?
I'm convinced it continues.
So you believe in reincarnation or something like that?
I like your phrase, something like that. I think that we try and define things very concretely,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe it's that our efforts to define things concretely are efforts to explain things that ultimately remain a mystery. Like Iris DeMint says, I think I'll just let the mystery be. But I'm absolutely convinced that there is a consciousness of some kind that continues. I know that and my father died at a time much younger than he should have. And I can name 2 or 3 times when in daylight consciousness or very consciously where I've seen him and felt his presence with me. So I have no doubt that is very much the case.
Okay.
It's especially true of people I've loved. And you're using reincarnation. I believe there's a sense of resurrection. It's like my grandmother, who I remembered as this wonderfully warm, enveloping, embracing person. The last several years of her life, she was affected by Alzheimer's and became someone who I didn't know. And I had this experience while doing her funeral, that all of a sudden the person she was when I was a little boy returned and embraced me. And at that point I knew that she had been like returned to her real self, to her most real authentic self. So I don't have any question about the fact that there's some way in which our consciousnesses continue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and to be frank with you, I also have a strong sense that there's such a thing as former lives.
Past lives.
Yeah, like you are somewhere and you've never been there before, but you've been there before.
Mm-hmm.
And you see things and feel things that are completely familiar, and the only way you can explain that is that you actually have been there before. So I'm a very strong believer in that.
Do you have any memory of your past lives?
Well, pretty close. My son now lives in Berlin, which I think is also a place with a lot of heavy spirits for a lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And in walking around and going to different places, I remember one time I went to this dance hall that was a very big dance hall in the 1920s, and then during the time of East Germany was completely locked up and shut up, and they had reopened it and turned it into a dance hall again. And when I went in there, I knew I'd been there in the 1920s. So I am all but convinced that I was walking around Berlin in the 1920s. I have a very, very strong impression of a lot of different things when I'm around there.
Interesting. Okay. So
how about you?
What was the question again? Sorry.
Have you ever, do you have any sense of a past life of yourself?
Yeah, actually, but it's kind of weird to even talk about because, okay, so basically I know that I was some sort of a musician in the 70s, And I had a feeling that something was going to happen in my 27th year. I was going to get some sort of mild fame or something like that. So the year I turned 27, ended up being on the album with Willie Nelson.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of people that actually believe I was a specific singer in the 70s. I've had multiple people come up to me and say that, and I'm just like, I don't know, maybe. But a lot of things with this person's life has aligned with my own, even down to the fact that people in Texas, where this person was born, they thought that I died of a heroin overdose. And it was a rumor in Texas, and I'm not even from there. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, very strange. And I was like, no, I'm not dead. I had people messaging me, who is this? Kanaska died of a heroin overdose. I'm like, what? Yeah, very strange. So, I don't know. A lot of things aligned with this specific person. But I don't know for sure, But there's always that. I've had, so many people tell me that you must be this person, blah, blah, blah. But, maybe we're bits of everything.
I feel like the bottom line behind all of this is that we really need to be open to these possibilities and to these realities and not shut ourselves away from them, because there's a lot to be learned there. And I think there are always these forces that are trying to send messages to us that we could learn from. I mean, I know that these uneasy spirits around Westpark are telling us something about their own experiences, but also suggesting to us that we need to do things on our own to break patterns, to break curses, and to move things in a different direction. I think that the whole idea of uneasy spirits is very important to look at and to respond to.
Once you start talking about past lives, people look at you like you're crazy. So I try to not believe it too much, even though within I do believe it. You know what I mean? But I'm just like, I don't know. It's interesting stuff. I've done segments on the show before, right down to this one doctor. He traveled to 3,000 children around the world who reported remembering their lives from a former life, and they could give so many details, like right down to their address, the name of their husband and wife, what they did for a vocation, how they died. They had scars that were associated with how this person had died. You know what I mean? So it just really makes me believe in it.
Well, and see, you and I are both artists, and one of the advantages of being an artist is either through music or through fiction, you can explore some of these things and create narratives and stories around them that allow you to live through that without anybody saying you're crazy, because you're creating. You know what I mean. It's like you can do that. Like in your book about the alien. It's not abduction. What's the name of it?
The Abducted.
Yeah, I was pretty close. Yeah, you're able to explore something that a lot of people, might raise their eyebrows about or whatever. But you can present that in such a way, and you do present it in a way that it becomes very tangible and very easy to understand. And fiction and music allows us to do this in ways that can get across without being judged so much.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I'm just going to switch topics here really quickly. Okay, so do you think there is life on other planets outside of Earth?
I think it would be, I think that that's an objective and logical conclusion. We don't have, at least most of us don't have direct evidence in front of us, but simple mathematics would seem to make that a very strong possibility.
Yeah. So have you ever seen a UFO or strange lights in the sky before?
Well, my short answer is yes, but the longer answer is that they usually turn out to be explainable in one way or another. We had this wonderful thing happen in, I think you'll enjoy this, in the week before Christmas. In Queens, there was this sort of transformer, a Con Ed transformer. Didn't exactly blow up, it had some major issue. And it turned the sky this incredible weird blue color. And I could see it all the way from like Manhattan and Central Park West. And the next day I was talking to a friend who actually lives in Astoria. And she said the minute it happened, she and her husband began arguing about, okay, is this terrorists or is this aliens? And people began running out into the street to try and see what was going on. And some people thought Jesus was coming again and tried to break into a church. And ultimately, when Con Ed, you'll enjoy this, when Con Ed said it was a Transformer incident, hundreds of people believed that there were like Transformers walking around Astoria.
God.
No, Con Ed said it. They said it was true. They said Transformers.
Some people's children. Yeah. So have you ever met or seen an entity which did not appear to be human or might look alien or something felt off? No? Other than me? I kind of look alien. So are you still involved in activism out in New York City?
Yeah, I spent all morning at the courthouse. We were demonstrating to try and keep Ravi Ragbir here. He's the main organizer for the new sanctuary movement. Okay. He's the executive director of it, and on at least 2 occasions he's become close to being deported, even though he's been living here for 20 years and has a wife and a child.
That's crazy.
Because the government can't stand what he's doing. But we've turned out hundreds of people, including politicians and others, and we've been able to keep him here so far. The sad thing is like a lot of other people don't have hundreds of people behind him. They wind up being deported. His associate director, who'd also been here for 20 years, was sent back to Haiti. So
that's crazy.
It's a very, very difficult time right now. And but it's also true that the literal fact that we had hundreds of people out there, including clergy people in their official clergy uniforms and House of Representatives people and politicians, like when they see that people are watching them, they'll back away. And it's just a goddamn shame. Oh, sorry. It's just a shame that we have to keep doing this over and over again.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So probably my biggest thing right now is migration. I'm involved in an international work group. I spent time in Sicily in November visiting the place where the migrants are coming from North Africa into Italy and visiting with them. And, there's more people on the move right now than any other time in history. And also the forces against them are getting greater and stronger. The U.S. is a classic example of that, but the rest of Europe has essentially turned their back on people in Italy. So it's bad. So that's the main place of my activism right now, is probably with migration, immigrants, and refugees.
Okay. So have you noticed were you directly affected by the government shutdown, or any of your friends or people that you know?
Well, I was directly affected by it, only in that I've been having an ongoing issue with the IRS. They've sent me 3 different, for those of your listeners, that's the Internal Revenue System that has to do with taxes. They sent me 3 different letters, 3 different messages, all of which are in conflict with each other. And so when I called to try and figure it out, they said, we are unable to take your call.
Oh, God.
I'll try it later. And after 2 days, I figured out, it's the government shutdown. So that's probably the only way it directly affected me. But we know, but here we are. You talk about activism. The reason that Trump folded was the fact that the workers at LaGuardia Airport took actions that basically said, we're going to really mess things up if you don't get it back together. And how, to think about LaGuardia Airport getting worse, that's a really terrifying thing. So, but it was not the politicians, it was common workers that made it move forward.
Okay. So have you ever had a near-death experience before?
Oh, God, yes. In fact, I was quite young at the time, and it literally changed my life. I was on a like a rubber raft excursion through rapids, and I got bounced out of the raft and was trapped underneath of it in like a sort of bowl, and it was to the place where I was starting to actually lose consciousness, and what I was experiencing was only a very short time of panic and fear, and then all of a sudden this incredibly warm experience began to wash over me, and I began to feel like completely comfortable, completely at peace. And then somehow they managed to get the raft moved off of the top of this bowl and pulled me out. And when they pulled me out, I experienced that as being violent and disruptive. And this sort of told me that, like, at least death by drowning was nothing to fear, that ultimately it was warm is the only way I can describe it. It just felt like completely comfortable, like arms were embracing me. It was like an incredible feeling of peace. And it was actually being pulled out of the water that was like, scary and terrifying and violent.
Okay. So how do you think we can help create a better world to live in?
I actually think that the most important thing starts with one-on-one relationships that move on from there. I really think, for example, in terms of political kind of things, most of the time debate gets absolutely nowhere. What does get somewhere is conversation. Like in the work we're doing with refugees, what they said right now is like, we need to move beyond talking about being pro-refugees or anti-refugees. What we need to begin with is just like being with refugees and seeing what happens from there. It's this whole thing about, I found this was really true back when we were trying to win a marriage equality, that like if you approach it as a didactic debate, people draw sides and you get into these arguments that go absolutely nowhere. And so what we finally did is we committed ourselves to having 1,000 conversations. And there's something happens when you engage someone in a conversation that respects them for who they are and allows them to be who they are. Not always. I mean, there are some people who are hopeless. I'm sorry, but the average person, you can make a tremendous amount of difference simply by listening and engaging in conversation and allowing them to share their own doubts, and ultimately they'll share their doubts about their own positions if you don't force them to really defend them. And the stories of human beings' experiences, more than anything, help us change. I remember I was working with a church in Pittsburgh that was theoretically very conservative, and this is one of my favorite quotes. And there was a kid in that church who was gay, and normally most people would sort of be against that, but he was one of theirs, and they were going to stand up for him because it was their community. I remember one of the guys talking to me and said, "Well, Pastor, look, I got to admit that, like, we ultimately don't think this is right, but on the other hand, he's one of ours, and sometimes you just have to set principle aside and do what's right." And I thought that was like the best quote, and so I think that the best way to bring about change really happens through one-on-one relationship and taking risks and understanding that ultimately don't sit around and wait for politicians to do something, because you're going to be waiting forever. That we have to do things like at the lowest grassroots level, and that will ultimately force what's above us to make change. But we have to do it at the level where we live, and not expect that there's going to be saviors or or politicians who are going to make this happen. We have to do it. It's up to us.
Very true.
Let me give you an example. It's like one of my favorite songs is "Blowing in the Wind," and I was in Florida shortly after the Parkland shootings, and I kept thinking about what the high school students were doing. It was like blowing my mind, because they were saying, like, you guys really let us down. Like, you were supposed to give us a world where we were safe, and you didn't do it. You were supposed to deal with this, and you didn't do it. Well, now we're going to do it. And so when I was doing a show in Florida, I decided to sing "Blowing in the Wind." And at the end I said, what I learned from these students is it's too easy to say it's blowing in the wind. The real answer is that it's in our own hands. So what we need to say, the answer is not blowing in the wind, the answer is in our own hands.
Mm.
And it's simply doing what you can as you are, where you are, and then let the rest take care of itself.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Very wise words, my friend. So if our listeners want to reach out to you, what social media or website should they know about?
Okay. There's RLBRASHEAR.com. There's Robert Brashear on Facebook. There's also Reverb Nation Robert Brashear, which is a music page. And then I've got a music channel on YouTube.
Okay, nice. We'll play some of that tonight on the show.
And I got to tell you, Kanaska, I feel like that your model of creativity and social change, and all I can say is like free range thinking, is one that we can all feel inspired by, because it understands that social change involves creativity and involves allowing your mind to go beyond the normal boundaries. And I appreciate and have deep respect for what you're showing us in that way. So thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd like to thank you again for helping me many times in the past when I was homeless. So you've always been an awesome friend and very talented as well. And I hope 2019 brings you only good things.
And to you too.
I'm sure that you're going to do a lot of good things for this world. And so I'll definitely be seeing you on social media. And if you have any upcoming projects, just let me know and we'll get you back on the show.
Thanks a lot, Kanaska. I really appreciate it. It's been great being with you. And
yes, I appreciate you. Have a great night. Bye.
Peace out. Bye-bye.
You're tuned to the Witching Hours on CKCU 93.1 FM in Ottawa. I'm your host, Kanaska Carter. Do not go anywhere, folks. We've got a great show coming up for you tonight.